Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be looking at different JavaScript concepts that are very important for web development. We're going to be looking at concepts such as variables, arrays, objects, and functions. So let's create a folder called JavaScript Concepts. And in here, we're going to create a new file. Let's just call it concepts.js. So the first concept we'll be seeing are variables. So the main thing that we have to consider here is the difference between the const and the let keyword. So for example, we can have a variable called x, and we can set it equal to 1. And we can have another variable called y, and we can set it equal to 5. So here we're going to simply console.log x comma y. So if we run this code, we get 1 and 5. So now we're going to increase y by 10. So we're going to have y plus equals to 10. And again, we're going to console.log x comma y. So here what we expect is 1 and 15. And if we run it, we get 1 and 15. Now we're going to set y to something completely different. So we're going to set it to, let's say, some text. And we can save our file, and we're going to console.log it again. And if we run it, we get 1 and some text. But now if we were to say x and we're going to assign it a new value, let's say 4. Now if we save our file and if we run it, we get an error which says assignment to constant variable. So this is the main difference between the const and the let keyword. If we're using the let keyword, we can reassign our variable to something else, but if we're using the const keyword, we cannot reassign our variable. So the next concept we're going to be looking at are arrays. So we can use the const keyword to create an array, and we're going to set it equal to 1, 2, 3. We can console.log our array. If we save our file and if we run it, we get 1, 2, 3. So one thing we can do here is we can use different array functions. So there's a function called push, which adds an element to the end of the array. So we can say nums.push, and we can pass in a value, let's say 4. And now if we run our code, we get 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you need to notice here is even though we use the const keyword to declare our array, we can change its elements. This is because as a whole, the nums variable points to an array object. And even if we change elements, we'd still be pointing to the same array object. That is why we're not getting an error. Now when it comes to arrays, there are different methods we can use. So here we're going to be looking at the main ones. So the first one we're going to look at is the for each function. So we're going to have nums.forEach, and we're going to have a parameter, a num parameter, and we're going to console, and we're going to console.log this num. So the for each method is used to loop through each element of our array. So this num variable is going to be assigned to each element of our array, and we're going to be printing it out. So if we save our file and if we run it, we get 1, 2, and 3. Now the next function we're going to be looking at is the concat function. So what the concat function is going to do is it's going to create a new array from another array. So we can have another array, we're going to call it nums2, and we're going to set it equal to nums.concat, and we're going to pass in what we want to add. So let's just put in 4. So here the concat function is not going to change the original array. Instead, it's going to create a new one with the additional values. So now if we console.log nums, and we're also going to console.log nums2, Now if we save our file and if we run it, we see that the original array hasn't been changed, but our new array has the new element 4. The next method we're going to be looking at is the map method. So again, the map method is going to create a new array. So we're going to have another variable called the nums2, and we're going to set it equal to nums.map. And in here, we're going to have a num, and we're going to have a block of code. So in this case, we're going to have return, and we're going to have an li tag. Then we're going to have the num. Then we're going to have another li tag. So what the map function does is it's going to let us modify the elements of our array. In this case, we're using it to create list elements with each array element. And as I said before, as the concat function, the map function also does not change the original array. Instead, it creates a new one. So now if we console.log nums2, and if we run our file, we get 3 li tags. The next concept we're going to be seeing is the destructuring assignment. So let's just get rid of this, and in our array we're going to add a couple more elements. And now we're going to use destructuring. So we're going to have const, and in square brackets we're going to have different variable names. So let's say first, second, and this is the destructuring assignment. It's going to be 3 dots, and we're going to give it a name. So let's just say rest. And we're going to set this whole expression equal to our array, nums. So the first variable here is going to be assigned to the first element of our array. The second variable is going to be assigned to the second element of our array. And the rest variable itself is going to be an array, and it's going to contain the remaining elements of our array. So let's just console.log all the variables and let's see what we get. So we're going to console.log first, we're going to console.log second, and we'll also console.log the rest variable. Now if we save our file and we run it, as you can see, we get 1, we get 2, and we get the rest of our array. So we can use the destructuring assignment with objects as well. So this is actually very important because we're going to be using it very often when we write our applications. So let's create an object. Now to create an object, we're going to use the const keyword, and we're going to give our object a name. Let's just give it person. And in curly braces, we're going to have different key value pairs. So in this case, we're going to have the key name, and we're going to give it John. And the key value pairs are going to be separated using a comma. So we're going to have age, we're going to set it to 20. And finally, we're going to have education, and we're going to set it to PhD. Now to access different elements or different values of our object, we're going to use either the dot operator or square brackets. So we can say console.log, and we can pass in person.name. So if we save our file and if we run it, we get John. We can also console.log person, and in this case we're going to use the square brackets, and we're going to pass in age using double quotes or single quotes. So we use the square brackets when our keys are more than one word. So if our key was, let's say we had is space student, we can't do this. This is going to cause an error. So we need to add quotation marks at the beginning and at the end. And we can give it a value. Let's just say true. Now, if we wanted to access this attribute, we can only use square brackets, because if we said person dot is space student, this is going to give us an error. Instead, we should use square brackets, and in here we can pass in is space student. Now if we save our file and if we run it, we get true and we get 20. Now back to the destructuring operator, we can have const and in curly braces this time. Last time we had square brackets because we were dealing with arrays, and in curly braces we're going to have different variables. Let's call them name, and we're going to have age, and we're going to have education, and we're going to set this equal to our person object. Now we can save our file, and before that we're going to use the console.log function, and we're going to print out, let's just say we're going to print out the name and the education variable. Now if we save our file and if we run it, we get John and we get PhD. One thing you need to notice here is that the variable name needs to match with the key in our object. So if we got rid of this E, and if we saved our file, and if we console.log the same thing, and if we run our file now, we get undefined. That is because the key does not match the variable. The final concept we're going to be seeing is functions. So to create a function, we're going to use the const keyword, and we're going to give our function a name. Let's call it square. And we're going to pass in a value. So we're going to have an input. Let's just give it x. And we're going to return x times x. Now there is another way of defining functions in JavaScript, but throughout this course we're going to be using arrow functions exclusively. One thing you need to notice here is we did not use parentheses when we passed in our input. That is because we only have one input. If we had multiple inputs, we would have had to use parentheses. Now to call our function, we simply write the name, and we're going to pass it a value. Let's just say 10, and we need to console.log it to see the result. Now if we save our file and if we run it, we get 100. Now as an exercise, we're going to refactor our course info application using objects. So we're going to go to our application. Now we're going to refactor the parts variables, and we're going to use an object instead. We're going to be using an array of objects. So we're going to get rid of this, and we're simply going to call it parts, and we're going to set it equal to an array. And in this array, we're going to have different objects. So the first object is going to have name, and it's going to be fundamentals of React. And it's also going to have an exercise, and it's going to be 10. And we're going to have, since we have 3 parts, we're going to have another object. Its name is using props, and it's going to have an exercise attribute, and it's going to be 13. And we're going to have our final part with name equal to using states, and it's going to have an exercise of 9. Now we've refactored our parts variable. Now we need to actually use it in our code. So in our main or in our root component, we're simply going to pass in the whole array. So here we're going to go to content, and we're going to give it parts, and we're going to set it equal to our parts variable. Again, in the total as well, we're going to give it our parts variable. Now we need to go and adjust our different components. So we don't need to change the header component. Now in the content component, instead of passing in props.p1, we're going to have props.parts. So we need to name this parts, since in our main application we gave it parts as an attribute. Now inside parts, we need to access the first element of our array. In that case, we're going to be using square brackets. And since we are accessing the first element, we're going to have 0, since arrays are indexed starting from 0. Then we're going to use the dot operator to access the attributes of our object, of our first object. So we're going to access the name attribute. And again, we're going to go to the second one, and we're going to go to the second element of our array, and we're going to access the name attribute. We're going to do the same for the third part. And in the exercises as well, we're going to have parts. And from our first object, we're going to extract the exercise attribute. We're going to do the same for the second part. we're going to extract the exercise attribute. And finally, we're going to do the same for our third object. So we're done with our content component. Now the final thing we need to change is the total component. In here, instead of using props.e1, we're going to have props.parts, and we're going to get the first object, and we're going to access the exercise attribute. Again, we're going to do the same for the second one. And finally, we're going to do the same for the third one. So now we can save our file, and we're going to open our terminal. So we're going to head to our application folder, which is in course info exercise. And we're going to cd into our course info application. And in here, we're going to run npm run dev. And now if we go to our browser, we can see that we have the same output. So this has been important JavaScript concepts for web development. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.